From the snowflaked shores of the North Saskatchewan River right here in scenic Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, this is your host, Scott Roos, and you are on the line with Down to the River radio show. My guest today is somebody that's no stranger to me, although it's been a very long time. This is Taylor Ashton on the line. Taylor, how you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
Not bad. Now I know that this is you do this for a living, and you talk to guys like me a lot. So I don't expect you to remember an interview that happened 8 years ago. But that's literally the last time we chatted.
Was it a in-person studio thing or was it over the phone?
It was a phoner for Folk on the Rocks in Yellowknife.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Um,
way back.
well, I do remember that festival and having a lot of fun there.
Yeah, well, now shortly after, things kind of went awry with Fish and Bird. Like you're the former Fish and Bird vocalist. I think it mentions that in your bio, so I don't think I'm,
That's right.
off base here bringing it up. So, I mean, I guess the operative question then would be what happened because it seemed like that band was on a pretty good, pretty upward trajectory.
Yeah. I mean, it was personally the different members of that band were finding ourselves drawn to different places all around the country, and so it just there was never like an official. It was almost like there was really no official breakup exactly, as so much as a drifting apart, and it just kind of we started to sort of take less and less gigs and just tour less and less to the point where it just made sense for all of us to kind of fill up our time doing other things.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, and there was definitely some feeling of I there was that feeling of like, oh, we're kind of, it's like the name recognition is starting to happen more and more, but at the end of the day, it wasn't kind of right for us to keep doing it at that time. But
Yeah, yeah.
we never say never.
Well, now is that in part due to Adam going off to Berkeley, or had he already gone to Berkeley at that point in time when you were in Fish and Bird?
He went to he started going to Berkeley, and he went a little later in life than a lot of people go to Berkeley. So he was kind of later into his 20s with a lot of
Yeah.
19-year-olds in his class. But he and I both, when a lot of people go to music school, were already hitting the road really hard. So it definitely was a factor in that there was just sort of literally less time for us to possibly get on the road
Yeah.
because of his school schedule and kind of in the meantime I was getting interested in living in New York, and I ended up there, and yeah, we kind of ended up doing different things. But Adam actually just put out an amazing album with his band called Aerialists.
That's right.
I
Yeah.
don't know if you've had a chance to listen to that,
I have.
but I sang on one of the tunes on that. So we're still doing things together when it makes sense
Yeah, well, and I did want
and
to.
when it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, and I did want to bring that up very briefly because, of course, we want to talk about the romantic. But I mean, now, like, was that the first time in several years that you and Adam had really, collaborated on anything?
Yeah, that's true. It was cool. It was kind of a remote kind of thing. They sent me the track, and yeah, it was really nice to kind of catch up in that way. And it was also a very different way than than he and I have collaborated in the past, because of course before we were always in the room together and we would be in the studio, but this was like they sent me a finished track and I wrote the tune over top of it, and so yeah, it was really fun, and I really hope we get to do something like that again.
Yeah. Well, and now, so then it sounds like you haven't entirely closed the door on that relationship, and that there's room for future collaborations with yourself and Aerialists, or maybe Adam coming over and doing something on something of yours.
Exactly, yeah, totally. And he's still and will always be just one of my best buds. So
Yeah. Well, now, my question then would be, so you're in Vancouver. There's a pretty decent little folk scene going on there. I'm sure that, I could name drop people like Brad Ferguson and of course Ryan from Mother Mother. I mean, you guys are probably all relatively close knit, tight knit scene, am I right?
It's funny. When I was in Vancouver, I actually left there just after I graduated high school, and like I never went to, I never really went to a bar in Vancouver until we were touring through. I was living in Victoria when Fish and Birds started. And
Right.
actually I haven't lived in Vancouver since. I know there is a whole community there, but I haven't personally ever felt like a part of it so much. But yeah, I mean, obviously Mother Mother is incredible, and I've listened to them for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Dan Mangan's a buddy.
That's right. Dan's out there.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, now, I mean,
But,
I guess because
yeah.
of that disconnect, then it probably, probably made it a little easier to make such a giant leap to New York. I mean, what was it about New York that drew you there as opposed to maybe another city well known for singer-songwriters like Nashville, for instance?
It kind of, I mean, what it came down to actually ended up being that I had moved a couple times previous to moving to New York. I lived in Winnipeg for a little while, and then I lived in Toronto after that for a few years. And so part of the move to New York actually had to do with the fact that it's a really easy, or at least it felt easy at the time. That it's an easy overnight bus ride. So I was going down to visit, and I had just like one or two friends living in New York. Actually, my friend Charlotte Cornfield was living there, and so I went and just was hanging out with her. And we were getting donuts one night, and I just kind of floated it past her. I was just like, New York is so cool. I'd like gone to 3 different shows in 2 days, and they'd all been like really blown my mind. All sorts of like different kinds of music. It's really like diverse musically. And in terms of like, you can go see a great singer-songwriter, you can go see like a crazy jazz show, like you can go see amazing comedy for free. And it's all just super inspiring stuff. And I just was kind of like, I could really see myself living here. And I was like almost joking, I think, when I said that. And she just mentioned to me that she had a room opening up in her apartment. And I kind of, things at that moment were just a little loosey-goosey in my personal life. So I kind of had I had the space to just kind of up and go. So I just went for it. And it was pretty crazy at first, but I've definitely settled in there, and I love it a lot.
It's so inspiring. I mean, I haven't been to Nashville. That's definitely high on my list of places to go to. But having gone to New York a few times, like as a musician myself, I've never really felt more at home than getting in that area. I mean, there's just so much entertainment, and it just breathes art,
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And sometimes it's pretty like, it's definitely kind of harsh sometimes in that like it can be kind of overstimulating. But luckily I live in a pretty chill neighborhood. I'm in South Brooklyn, which is like, it's got a very neighborhood feeling to it. So it's like,
yeah,
I can kind of, if I want to, I can go and have like a New York day where I go and see a million shows, and I like, go around and do the things, or I can kind of stick around and get groceries and make dinner and just stay in. And so it's to me, it's pretty important to kind of take breaks from the New York stuff.
No doubt. Yeah, I could see how the crowds and the throngs of people and the bright lights, big city kind of scenario of New York would get to you maybe if you're living there full time.
Yeah, and actually, it's that moment for me. It's often when I'm driving out of town, if I'm leaving town, and if I drive over the bridge that goes to Staten Island, there's just this one particular view where I just feel like I can see too many houses, and it just kind of gets to me how many people just live in this insane place.
Yeah.
And like, the first time I saw that, I just was like, I kind of like almost started hyperventilating. I was just like, this is too much, but I'm used to it now.
Yeah, well, and you've been able to
Yeah,
immerse yourself in a bit of the local music culture enough that when it came to recording and writing the songs for the Romantic, you were able to basically find a wide swath of different people that you could have on the record, right? I mean, that seems to be the way the story goes.
totally. Yeah.
So how did you get to that place, Taylor?
It was kind of a process when I first moved to New York. Like it was really exciting, and I was kind of aware of some people there that I wanted to get to know, and there was like the first few months I was just like, wow, there's so many possibilities. And then it's no small thing to kind of pick yourself up and move to a place like that with not a whole lot of personal connections.
Yeah.
And so there was a period of time where it was like, I kind of questioned. I was like, do I really have a community here? And there was a little while where it was a little lonelier. And but it's just I think you spend enough time in a place that you kind of get past that point where you sort of meet someone and you're kind of like, wow, I really want to tell this person, like, I really want to find out everything about what they do, and I really want to tell them everything that I'm up to, and like, I really want to like make this friend and like make this connection, and to the point where like you see someone around enough, and it's like you don't need to necessarily do that anymore. And I think that's the point at which I started to feel a lot more comfortable and a lot more. It kind of was one of those things where it was like this gradual thing where I was meeting people and making these sort of deeper connections with friends, and to the point where I was like, one day I kind of looked around and I was like, I actually know a lot of people here, and they're like, a lot of them are just really incredible musicians, and like, yeah, I don't take that lightly. It's a great privilege to know so many really fantastic musicians, and I was
No doubt.
just really blessed with how many of them said yes to being on my album.
Yeah. Well, now, like, did you establish these contacts via like open mic nights and different, coffee house type things and stuff? Like, how do you break into New York?
There was a little bit of that, not so much with like an open mic night type of thing, but that when I first got there, I was busking in the subway, because one of the things I'd sort of forgotten to do before moving to New York was lined up work.
Yeah.
So I had a few gigs, and I was, I had a visa to play, but I needed to kind of get between things, and the only thing that I could do was music. So I was playing in the subway, and I actually met a lot of people down there. In fact, the studio that I recorded a lot of the Romantic in was originally in the house of someone that I met. I met in the subway. They heard me singing, and they just were like, "Hey, here's my email. I've never heard you before. Let me know like what your deal is, and like let me know if I can help." And we sort of shot a couple emails back and forth, and he just said, like I'm living in this house where there's a studio, and you should come by. And it was, that ended up being this very like, I was kind of like, yeah, might as well see what this guy's up to, and we, I ended up living there and making the record there. And a lot of my best friends from New York are people that I know through that house. It's called the Mason Jar Music Studio, and there was a house attached to it. And it's since moved neighborhood, so it's a little bit of a different thing now. But those connections remain. So it's definitely been like being open to things, because there's definitely part of me when I was busking that when people would kind of come up and be like, "Hey, we should collaborate," like I was a little bit like, sometimes I would be a little like defensive, and I wouldn't always be super open to it. But when I was open to it, some pretty cool things happened.
Yes, well, for sure. Well, now let's get to a couple of the tracks here, just for a couple of minutes, Taylor. I mean, now, of course, the Romantic literally just released yesterday. So One thing, that really grabbed me about this record is the texture of instrumentation. Like, for instance, on the song "If You Can Hear Me," there's a bass clarinet solo of all things. I mean, what makes a singer-songwriter such as yourself go, "Aha, bass clarinet, let's put that there." How did that come about?
Well, that's actually the musician that plays that. His name is Alex Spiegelman, and he is actually someone who helped me make the record. I credit him as a co-producer on the record. He wasn't sort of helping with it when I started it, but he kind of came in halfway through and sort of steered it, kind of helped me stick the landing with it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I mean, in that case, because I was working with Alec, it was almost more that I wanted Alec to do something on that part than, and so it was, his suggestion was like, I could play a little bass clarinet. We tried a few things and I was just so, that solo that he plays is so beautiful.
It's amazing.
And yeah, he's really something else. He's also a great singer-songwriter. You can go see a show where all he does is play guitar and sings. But he sits in with people all the time and has his horn, and it's just he's definitely a man about the scene, and has given his magic touch on a lot of great recordings. Yeah, so it's a lot of those choices actually on the record. Some of them were kind of like, I want strings here, or I want keyboards here, but a lot of them had to do with, I would really like to do something with this person and they're a piano player. Or like, I want to do something with this person and they play bass or whatever. And
yeah,
that's a big part of how those decisions were made. They were kind of intuitive. Like, I think I would like to have this person be involved in some way. And, yeah, so that's sort of how that all kind of came together.
So now let's talk about your voice a little bit. In Straight Back, for instance, you have this interesting kind of catchy "wee you" thing going on here. So I mean, when you were writing these tracks, Taylor, I mean, how do you go about writing your own personal songs and coming up with things like that? Because I mean, the fact that you did that, now all of a sudden, I remember that's the "wee you" song. You know what I mean?
Right. It's that particular little hook that kind of came from that was a lick that I played on the clawhammer banjo. And I'm not even sure, like, when people listen to that song, like, if that sounds like a banjo song or not, because there's so many other instruments that are playing. But that like I was kind of messing around with a clawhammer banjo thing in this one specific tuning, and that kind of came out. And that's actually that's something I really love about the banjo, is that it has these kind of like offbeat kind of syncopated things that I feel like the banjo wants to play, these kind of syncopated things. And that was one of them that ended up being like a nice hook in that tune.
Yeah.
And, it's the ooh part, the voices end up sort of taking that over. So it doesn't end up being like a huge banjo feature, but, and there's actually a few things like that on the record where I wrote things on one instrument, or I conceived of them as a certain thing, and they end up being more, in another, like, there's a different instrument that ends up being the featured thing. Like the last track is a piano song, but I wrote that on guitar. Right. The second last song, I think, or no, the third, this Fallen Down Tree is a guitar song, but I wrote that on banjo. And Straight Back I actually wrote on guitar, and it ended up on banjo on the recording. So it kind of, I definitely will, after I write a tune, even if like the lyrics are done and the chords are done, I'm definitely kind of always in this period, really until it gets recorded, of like, this could change at any moment, depending on what I end up hearing. And yeah, I actually, Straight Back was a really different song. And then I was watching all of these instructional videos that Bernard Purdie did, like decades ago for VHS tape. drumming instructional video things,
Yeah.
and was just like so inspired by his like these like funky subdivisions that he would play while drumming. And I was just like, I wonder if I can play the banjo like that. And that's kind of how it turned into the like dancey tune that it is.
Well, now I'm also glad that you did name drop Fallen Down Tree, because one of the more interesting things about that song is here you're chugging along in a pretty straightforward 4/4 meter, and then partway through the song gets really big, and you switch to a 3/4. I mean, there's another really interesting melodic choice.
Yeah, and that was actually the whole song originally was a waltz, and then the verses had always been bugging me, and I just kind of was like, I loved the chorus, and I really felt good about it, and it just, I don't know, there's this weird feeling like I just was like getting dizzy with it being in 3 the whole time, and I think I tried a few different things, like I until I kind of landed on like putting the verses in 4, and it was at that point that it kind of was like, oh, here we go, like this is the rhythm that this needs to have. And sometimes songs like that, like, I'll be waiting for that sort of missing link to happen. And sometimes it'll happen, and it did with that tune. And then sometimes it won't, and I won't end up, I'll just be like, well, too bad for that. 'Cause I don't have the missing special sauce to finish this one.
Yeah.
But you never know when that's going to come, 'cause I'd been done with that song for a few months before I kind of was like messed around with it to do that with it.
Well, that's an interesting point too about your own process. Is it doesn't sound like there's necessarily a definitive point where you say that's it. Like it could always change, and it could always evolve, and it's open for interpretation depending on who the players are in the session.
Yeah, well, totally. Yeah, and some of these tunes, like, they sounded really different over the course of a few years, and they ended up in a place that I wouldn't have pictured at first. And I'm really grateful that for this process, that it was kind of long enough that I had a chance to sort of sit with some of them and kind of like listen and go, well, this isn't really inspiring me as much as I want it to. So I either need to let this song go or try something new. And some tunes I let go, and then other ones that thing would happen where I would kind of find that thing that would make it fresh again.
Right.
Yeah.
So now you were likely recording this when, like at the beginning of 2019?
Some of it, yep. And some of it stretches back as like, I think the earliest thing that was recorded on there is from 2015.
Oh, wow. So that would have been right when you moved.
But exactly. And, in between starting this album and finishing it, I actually started and finished a whole other album with a friend of mine named Courtney Hartman. We put out a duo record a couple of years ago.
That's right, and that's a little bit more straightforward, a folk album from what I heard. Just I skimmed through it really briefly.
So in the process of, yeah, exactly. So like in the process of making this long process of like, multi-tracking these tunes for the solo record, she and I just like went up to a beautiful dance hall in Massachusetts and spent a week recording those tunes. And it was a nice palate cleanser, because I was a little lost at that point as far as like, what's going to happen with this album?
Yeah.
And so we just went up and did this thing. And then I got back to New York, and we sort of mixed it and released it pretty quick. And it was after that Alec, who I mentioned to you, that plays the bass clarinet.
Right.
He kind of was like, can I help you finish this? And it was really amazing that he did, because then at that point we just kind of like, we sat down and just kind of like, we just looked at what we had and what sort of needed to be done, and kind of trucked through it. And it was still kind of like, he and I were both kind of in and out of town. So
yeah,
it still took a little while, but yeah, I'm grateful that it kind of represents a long period of time.
No doubt. Well, what made February 28th, 2020 the right time for Taylor Ashton to release The Romantic?
Well, I mean, in some ways it was, Signature Sounds was my first thought, basically, for a label that I wanted to work with. I've been aware of their work for a long time, and just had heard so many good things about about what they're like to work with, and it's all been great. And so it was kind of just that was the day that they had, and I do like that it's the day before Leap Day, and I wanted to. I was like, it's kind of a shame that it's the day before February 29th, which would be such a fun day to record or release an album, but
Yeah.
apparently the gods of music distribution have decided that you can only release music on a Friday. So,
And it never used to be Friday, right? It used to be Tuesdays.
No,
at
Tuesday,
one
I
point.
think, before.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. With Fish and Bird, we never paid attention to any of that stuff. We just put it out whenever we wanted to, and we were really it was very DIY.
Yeah.
In those times.
I think when I dropped my punk rock EP many years ago, I just was like, let's just put it out on this day. And it was like a Monday or something. It was just random.
Yeah.
There was that was a really independent record, but.
There's something nice about that too. There's that thing where you're just like, it's just out. Just listen to it whenever you want without it's nice to kind of get ready and do the whole big release day thing and try to get people pumped up. But there's also something pretty fun about just being like, you know what, I just put it up on Bandcamp today. Check it out if you want. I don't care. So,
yeah.
But maybe, I do think that I'll do that again sometime. I don't know if it'll be the next one, but I definitely have the hankering in my soul to do something like that. That's kind of a, less fanfare. There's something nice about that.
Anyway, man, I really appreciate your time today, just to catch up and chat with chat about all things Taylor Ashton, man. Thanks for coming down to the river with me today.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for getting into the music, and thanks for your questions. I appreciate it. Good to chat.
No worries. Yep, for sure, man. Take care.
All right. Thank you so much.